Today, I have a special guest on the show today, everybody, Mark Bovair. Mark is the co-host of the Drink Podcast. His show focuses on everything from sports, current events, and, of course, personal development, one of my faves. Mark is a single father of 3 who hails from the great state of Michigan, just like me. I personally really enjoy his conversations and perspective around fatherhood, balancing work with a pursuit of your passions, and then discovering who you really are as a man. So welcome to the show, Mark.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, I'm pumped to have you here. You know, you and I are kind of in the similar spot. You know, we're in our 30s. We got some kids. We're trying to figure out what we're supposed to be doing in life. You and I were just chatting a little bit before getting on the recording about that. So let me learn a little bit about your family. How old are your kids, and what stage of life are they in? Where are you right now in your life with the kids?
Well, I'm in a bit of a transition with my kids. They were all so little for so long, close together, and tomorrow my youngest son turns 9, so I joke it's halfway to 18. He's halfway to an adult, right? Even though the adulthood now starts at like 26,
right?
But he's halfway to 18, so I'm in a little different phase now that my kids are 12, 10, and 9 or
12, 10,
almost 11.
9. That's cool.
Yeah, so we're hitting that preteen stage. It's been a little bit of a transition. You can feel things shift a little bit as a father. When you go from reading them bedtime stories to like, we got to stop playing Fortnite and go to bed. We can't be staying up all night. So, I've been doing this. I've been a single father for going on 6 years now. Been running a household by myself. I split custody. Mm-hmm. And so I got my kids half the time. And we're making it work out as best as we can, and we're having a good time doing it, and we really enjoy it.
Do you guys do transition on weekends or weekdays? How does the split work?
We do it's called a 5-5-2-2 schedule. 5-5-2-2. So 5 days me, 5 days her, 2 days her, me, 2 days her. We transitions. That works out. So we get 2 nights during the week each every week. So I get Monday and Tuesday night. She's got Wednesday, Thursday, and then we alternate the weekends, and so it just works out. 5-5-2-2. It's been that way for the whole time. So
you said it's been 6 years since that happened. So your 12-year-old was 6 around that time.
6, then. Yep.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And how was that transition for the kids when they were? I guess they were kind of younger. So I guess you can't say that they were younger and they maybe got used to it, but they've been living this way for a little while now.
It's pretty normal to them now. I think. Okay. My youngest has no recollection of what it was like before.
Right.
And, the older 2, every once in a while, they'll mention something, but it's really kind of, this is the normal now. And things have been pretty steady and the same for so many years. This is just the way it is.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Excellent. So you talked about that transition from reading them bedtime stories to now them playing, Fortnite and saying, hey, all right, it's time to go to bed. What is the age when I'm going to lose my little boy wanting me to read him bedtime stories?
Well, I don't know. They don't always. They still want it once in a while, but mostly it's like, hey, Dad, go away. For my son, he hit right around 11, maybe just before his 11th birthday. Mm-hmm. It really changed, and part of that was just developmental. Like I think if they hit puberty later, it changes. But he happened to hit puberty kind of young, and so his mindset changed pretty fast with the hormones and everything, and all that. So my daughter's 10 now, just about to turn 11. So I'm clinging on to it for dear life, man, because I just don't know. Like one day you just wake up and it's like different. You've read him the last bedtime story. And you don't realize that was the last day you read him a bedtime story. Like you don't even know that it happened, and it just sort of happens. And so somewhere around 10, 11 was when it hit. So clinging to it with the other 2.
That's good. Well, I'll prepare myself. Thank you for that. So you've talked about on your show, which I've had a chance to listen to. I really like the conversations you're having. Yeah. You've talked about the importance of maintaining your identity separate from being just dad. It's important for us to be fathers, but why do you think it's important for fathers nowadays to have a separate identity outside of just being dad?
Well, I think in years past, and I'm not even that long ago, but maybe 50 years ago, it was natural for fathers to have an identity outside of their kids. It was like a given. You almost had to, or it was accepted. And fathers that were deeply involved with their kids' lives was a rarity. When you talk to people in our parents' generation, their dads weren't that involved. It was rare if they were involved in the day-to-day. And so I think that we've progressed in a good way in a lot of ways. Like I love the fact that I can be very involved in my kids' lives, and and that's definitely changed. But you also have to kind of build your own structure around having your own life, because you want your kids to look up to what you're doing. I mean, that's what they learn. They learn from people that they respect, and you want them to respect you. And the best dads are the ones where the kids are like, I want to be like dad. Well, if dad is just dad, that's hard to be. I just want to be like dad because all dad does is like sit there and take care of me. Well, that doesn't teach me anything about going out in the world and doing things and looking forward. So I think it's more, you got to force yourself in today's climate to be a little bit more outward thinking, away from your family, teach them to do things and take them out into the world and kind of get them on that track. Yeah. And I think you have to build that sort of structure, and you got to have things outside of your family. I think it's great. Men have wanted to devote their lives to their families, but I think the balance got off a little too far. And they gave up a little too much of themselves, and you get a little unhappy because you're not doing the things you used to like doing. You're not playing basketball with the buddies, and you're not golfing on the weekends with your friends. And some of that goes away when you have kids, but I see it all too often. People give up all of it, and they kind of get miserable, and that's not good for anybody.
Sure. Yeah. It's a balance. I completely hear what you're saying. My dad, when he was working right out of college, he worked long hours, dedicated his life to the corporate life. And, I love him for it. And he gave us a lot of opportunity in our lives. But yeah, I mean, what you're describing is that it's very separated. But as time has gone on, there's sort of that other mindset of, hey, you need to be really involved in your kids' lives and be their friends, right? You got to be their best friend. Right. But there's a thought of being the best friend that maybe they don't need a best friend. Maybe they just need a dad. Maybe they need somebody to look up to. So I resonated with that conversation a little bit. That was interesting. Yeah. How was your relationship with your father as you were growing up?
Really good. He was exactly as you described, though. He worked 60 hours a week, and so he was gone most of the week. I wouldn't see him on the weekdays, and then I'd see him on the weekend, and we do normal father-son stuff, play catch, teach me how to cut the grass, that sort of stuff. But it was definitely different. It was not hands-on. He wasn't involved in the day-to-day at all. I remember there'd be times when it would be like my brother and I home with just my dad. My mom was gone, and we were kind of lost. We were like listless. We didn't know how to do the most basic.
What are we supposed to do?
Yeah, like what do we do for dinner? Like, I don't know what to do. My dad was like, I don't know, let's go to Taco Bell. But it was a great relationship, and there was some natural respect there. And part of that might've been just the mystery, because I wasn't, there wasn't the day-to-day opportunity to lose that mystique of dad's going out into the world. He's making a living. He's providing for us. And that was that. So it was good.
That's very interesting.
I will say I have a better relationship as an adult with my father than I did as a kid. And there was nothing wrong with my, upbringing by my dad, but it's just that I actually spend more quality time with him now. He's retired, and I think we just sit down and enjoy some things together that we didn't do back then. And I didn't appreciate either. Kid, you just want to run out and do stuff. And, dad just wants to sit and watch a ball game with you. And, if you could go back in time and tell your 10-year-old self, dude, just sit and watch the ball game with your dad, man. Don't be in such a hurry to do something else.
Yeah, and you probably get we were talking about the 60-hour weeks as we're growing up, but you probably get a little bit more personal perspective for what your dad went through, is going through now that we're doing what we're doing as adults as well, right?
I don't think I really appreciated my parents fully until my early to mid 30s, and then all the responsibility that they were going through, and my kids hit the age when I could remember my own childhood, and I was like, wow, okay, now I get it. Now I understand, and I see what they sacrificed for us, and what they did to make sure we had the right upbringing, and it's really humbling in a way. Absolutely. And it makes you think back to the future of my own kids. You realize the rewards from being a parent are decades in the making. It's not, there is no immediate reward or gratification on a daily basis for this. They might not appreciate what you're doing for 20 more years. So you got to buckle up.
So those kids are the Fortnite players are going to respect you in like 15 years then, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I hope so. Let's hope so. As long as I don't let them play too much Fortnite, right, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, we started to touch a little bit about, the elements of being a good dad nowadays. What do you think those elements are? It sounds like you're thinking it's a balance of keeping your identity as a man, as a father, but then also, being involved. I mean, where do we find that balance? Where do we find the good principles of being a good dad nowadays?
That's a great question because I think that, first of all, I think that you have to create the structure for your kids. Kids thrive in structure, structured environment, and more than ever are we in a non-structured environment. I mean, it used to be very natural structures, but now it's very difficult to create structure for kids. There's just so much that they can do and so much to be involved in, and so easy to kind of just hand them a device and get them out of your hair and see them when they're 18. I think that you got to create the structure for them and teach them the ways of disciplining themselves. And so you don't want to always be the one who has to create the structure. You want to hand that off to them slowly. And so I look at it from the perspective of, I'm not going to be here to tell you to go to bed at a good time every night, so I can't force you to go to bed every night. You do when they're little, but at some point you have to teach your kids to go to bed at a good hour without too much prodding from you. Right. Maybe a suggestion or something. Same with eating healthier foods, doing your homework before you play. Some of that you have to tell a 6-year-old to do. Mm-hmm. But when they're 12, you kind of got to start teaching them to do that on their own. The goal is to raise a kid that's going to walk out into the world and be a fully functional adult, not a perpetual adolescent. And so I think it's our job as fathers to create that discipline in structure, but in a way that you can hand it off and teach your kids those routines and things like that, because I think it's lacking a great deal. When kids get out into the world, 18, 20, 22, whatever, they start to be on their own. They need that self-coping, that ability to self-discipline themselves, and we can create that for them.
Yeah, and with that, I mean, do you find, and maybe your kids are too young at this point, but do you find that you're going to be encouraging them to, get some summer jobs as they get a little older into their teenage years, things like that, to have that self-discipline and to carry that on into their college life?
Yeah, I go back and forth about that just because times have changed so much. When I was 16, it was a given that I was going to go get a job, right? There was no question about it. I was, if I was going to drive a car, I was going to contribute to the, paying for the insurance and doing that sort of thing. So I just went out and got a job. It was just expected. And I'm a couple of years away from that. I hope that's the case. Mm-hmm. It's a bit different now. Kids not everybody drives at 16. Right. Like when we were 16, you couldn't wait to get out there.
True.
I was waiting in line on my birthday at the Secretary of State's office to get a driver's license and be out there driving. But kids aren't doing that as much. It's not that they don't, but that things have just definitely slowed down. I think adolescence seems to go on a little longer than it used to. And I think that I have to base it on maturity level. I think each of my kids will be different. I think one of my kids will be, charging at 16 to get a driver's license and moved out by 18. And, I might never, I might not see him after that. But, other kids would be, they're not even ready to drive a car at 16. And they're not the maturity level is just not going to be there. So I think there's a little bit more in the modern parenting where we're a little bit more cognizant of the differences between kids, and we can't parent every kid the same. Yeah. And so my hope is that if they're ready, they get out and get a job. I think putting kids, I always tell this story because I think certain kids aren't really ready to be out in the workforce. When I was 16, I had a job as a busboy at a restaurant. And, Friday and Saturday night, I'd be busting tables till 1:00 in the morning. And, some of the dudes you're hanging out with when you're busting tables at 1:00 in the morning are not the best dudes. Yeah. I remember some guy, cook or something was like 2 in the morning. Can you give me a ride home? I'm 16, naive. And I'm like, okay, sure. Yeah, I can give you a ride home. He lived in the biggest ghetto of Detroit somewhere. Yeah. I'm like 16-year-old kid at 2 in the morning driving through, crack houses in Detroit. And so, good thing I was mature and I was aware of things and kind of realized I needed to get out of that situation. But not every kid's going to be ready for that and to be put in that situation. And so that's what concerns me. Most of these part-time gigs, little fast food places and restaurants and things, you're not hanging out with the best characters all the time. I got to be cognizant of that when I send my kid out and make sure they're ready to take that on
for $6 an hour or whatever.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You're hanging out with a bunch of pot smoking,
Right.
26-year-olds that live in their mom's basement. And while they're 16 trying to make $8, just got to be aware.
Oh, that's funny. Okay. All right. Well, we started to talk a little bit about that fatherhood identity and, going after some things that are exciting to you. You and I were chatting a little bit before we started recording about, diving into this podcast world because it's a lot of fun. Yeah. So why did you decide to start the drink? And like, what is your hope out of that personally?
We started it, Hutton and I, we've been friends from online. We met online a couple years ago going through, divorces and things and met over common ground and we became friends and we would have these talks and conversations and we thought, what's lacking is a really good show with like two people just talking about the issues of the day and not with some big slant or trying to push some political agenda or any of that stuff, or shock radio or just like two dudes who just want to talk about the issues of the day in like a normal context. And so we decided, well, what the heck, we can record this and make it a podcast. And we've had a blast doing it. It's really fun. We look forward to it every week. And we both have kids and busy and full-time jobs, but we make it happen. And it's really a fun outlet. I think one thing that we get out of it is this connection. I mean, we're in this world where he and I both live in rural areas. It's hard to make a lot of friends. We're not in the areas we grew up in, so we're not surrounded by all our childhood buddies or anything. Mm-hmm. And so it's that form of connection that goes a little bit beyond just words on a screen.
Yep.
And he and I enjoyed that. So the goal with the podcast, I think, is eventually to kind of just give the normal take on the world. Things are going crazy. Everybody's polarized. Everybody's going nuts over things left or right. And we're like, can't we just like be normal and just talk and like just talk about cool stuff that we like to do and things that help men make their lives a little better. In subtle little ways, not like you got to go nuts and do all these different things, but little things that have helped us because we've both been on really interesting and productive journeys ourselves that have turned our lives around. And why not share some of that knowledge with other people and hopefully get some interesting guests on there too.
That's great. I love it, man. That's cool. And you've found this as a, almost like an outlet, like a fun outlet while you're doing your 9 to 5, right?
Yeah, I think we need something like that, right? Yeah. Like, we need something to look forward to, something interesting. I mean, back in the day, guys would hang out in the locker room at the club and and just banter and do that sort of thing. And I think we miss a little bit of that now, and we crave it. And it's a hobby to look forward to. We pour some time and effort into it to make it as good as we can, and we're always trying to improve and build our audience. And yeah, it's a fun hobby. It gives you something to look forward to. I think you got to have something to look forward to. It goes back to the first point we made about having something outside of just simply coming home and devoting yourself to your family, something that's your own. It's your own gig. It's your hobby or something, and little side business, whatever you want to call it. That's cool. And just have fun with it.
Yeah. And outside of the work too, I know you've been vocal about this 40, 50 hour work week. I saw a tweet that you had the other day that kind of went viral a little bit about this grind that we all go through being unsustainable, emotionally, physically, mentally. Like, what do you think? What do you think could be done about that? Do we just need outlets like doing a podcast or getting together with friends in order to keep doing that? Or, I mean, how do you feel about this way of life that exists right now?
This modern way. Don't get me started on these commuting and that's my hot button issue is these long commutes and things. But I do think it takes you out of. I think the modern climate right now is very isolating. So many people live in strewn out suburbs throughout these metro areas, and they commute lonely in these cars for an hour each way, and they sit in these fluorescent lit cubicles, and we're so far from our natural state of millions of years of evolution, and now we're sitting in fluorescent cubicles not moving, and then in little boxes driving down the highway, and it's stressful. And I think the stress adds up, the lack of sensory stimulation adds up. I think you need to be outside working with your hands at least a little bit, something to engage your body. I think a lot of us do the best we can. We hit the weight room and we try to make it work. These are little like fixes that we try to make work, but I do think the current state is not sustainable. I think people are miserable. Antidepressant use is way up, and in general, people just seem to be less happy, despite being the most wonderfully prosperous time in history to be alive.
Yeah.
People generally don't seem any happier or more content than they did in the past, and so, as evidenced by people just getting, enraged by everything. And why is that? And I don't think that this is sustainable. And I think a lot of it comes down to meaning, and the meaning. I think a lot of people go into work and they might punch numbers on a spreadsheet after driving in a car all day, and they just don't see the meaning and purpose in it. And if your job is disconnected from the end product of whatever it is you're making, or the widgets your company does or whatever, you don't have any satisfaction going home at the end of the day. And that's why we do things like this. I mean, we got to like fill that void somehow. Like, I love doing yard work because it's like the one time a week I get out and push the lawnmower around, and it's like the one time a week I really feel physically alive. Like, I'm in touch with nature, and I kick back with a cold beer at the end of getting the yard all cleaned up, and I feel a sense of satisfaction that sitting in a cubicle in front of a computer screen all day does not bring.
I completely agree with you. I mean, even the lawn work idea that you're talking about there, especially with the, if you got office politics or dealing with stuff like that, it's like, all right, I know that I need to keep this lawnmower straight, and then I turn around and I do it again, and I do it again. I'm in control of this moment right now. It's like
right.
Everything else is politics aside, or the structure of work. It's like, I got this.
Exactly. And I think ambiguity of the jobs too. I'm a big advocate of I study organizational behavior and different things. It's a big interest of mine, just how people work and the way their minds work. And I think a lot of people are in jobs that are just ill-suited for their personalities and for their, different unique traits. And so that builds a low-level tension. And then on top of that, you have mostly ambiguous jobs that don't have a clear outcome. I mean, it was, back in the day when you just put car parts on a car going down the assembly line, at least you knew what you had to do. It was clear. You had to put 4 bolts on this thing, and it would go down the line, and you did it right or you didn't do it right. Now you got these kind of ambiguous jobs where you're pushing numbers on spreadsheets or building PowerPoints, and the feedback loop isn't very clear. And that ambiguity creates stress, I believe. And then you take the stress of the physical environment with the commute, and the stress, you're under this low level feeling of stress for 10, 12 hours a day. And I just don't think that that's good. A lot of people deal with that stress by eating too much food, binging on TV or alcohol and different vices like that. And I really think that that's a symptom of that. We're just not kind of out of our element here.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Well, I mean, we talked about a little bit of, I don't know if it's the solution, but at least a dabble in something that might get you excited. So you talked about getting outside and get your hands dirty, doing some things that are exciting to you, doing your podcast, creating something that's different, unique and new, and having fun with that. Do you think that, building something like The Drink or having more fun as a digital entrepreneur could bring that excitement in your life?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you get excited about it, right? Yeah. There's a feedback loop. Like, you go on and see, wow, we had a couple hundred more listeners this week on our podcast, and that's exciting. Like, that brings a thrill that none of the work stuff can bring. Not even a couple extra bucks in the paycheck. I think that can fill the void for sure. Although I think you got to be careful with the digital side. It's easy to become completely enamored with the digital pursuits because. Frankly, those are the things we can fit in our free time usually. Right. After the kids go to bed, what are we going to, we're not going to be out there, cutting the lawn and stuff. So we got to do it with what we have. Yeah. But I definitely do think it can fill the void, and having some creative pursuit, something you create, whether it's with your hands. Some people are just, predisposed to doing woodworking or some type of crafting. This is different. This is my thing. This is what I enjoy to do, is talk to people and create a digital product that can help people.
That's cool.
Hopefully in some way.
I like that. Well, I think a lot of people are almost stuck in this position that we're talking about too, because the pursuit of more, the consumerism society that we're in, has trapped people a little bit in order to have that lifestyle. And I know I've fallen into that too. You know, you get I've got the small house, and then you get a couple kids, and you got to get the bigger house, and then you got to get the two cars. You got the wife because she's got to go to her job, and it just starts building and building and building.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some conversations that have been interesting to me lately, although I'm not fully adopting it, are, you know, conversations around minimalism. You know, less is more. What do you think about that philosophy, that way of thinking?
Wow, that's a great question, because this is something I'm really passionate about. And you didn't know that ahead of time, which is cool. Yeah. I discovered minimalism. It was probably the first real step I had toward what I would call my self-improvement journey, or just in general, kind of like figuring out that the traditional way of living just wasn't really for me. I wasn't going to follow the standard path that is laid out for everyone. And discovering the minimalists, I don't know if you've heard of those guys. You know, they're pretty popular. They got a documentary on Netflix, and
I like their podcast, and I like the movie.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I like to, you know, I knew them before they were famous, but
cool.
I remember discovering them back when they had a couple thousand followers, and they were just getting started out, but their message resonated with me, and ever since then I've been you know, what I call, what's the right word, like an aspiring minimalist.
Yeah.
It's a little different when you got 3 kids. Minimalism takes on a different form than if you were like some single dude, 22 years old, you know. But I love minimalism. It kind of guides everything I do. Because back then, when I discovered them, I was a big environmentalist. I'm not necessarily I'm an environmentalist now, but it's just more perspective over time. But you know, I thought, how can I live with less? How can I have less of an impact on this world? And also, like, how much of my time and energy am I spending dealing with belongings and things and stuff? And, you know, I had a house just cluttered with things, and there's a basement filled with stuff that never gets touched, and all that stuff. And I mean, I took on minimalism hard, and I haven't looked back. You know, people come over to my house, and you know, my girlfriend will come over. She's like, it's like Spartan. It's very, very empty, but that's just the way it is. I love it that way. Like, simple, less things to care for, less physical clutter. I think for me is less mind clutter as well. And I'm interested to see how far I can take. I don't want to take it to the extreme, but I think it also led me to financial breakthroughs, in the sense that, you know, if I don't need all this stuff and all the space to take care of, I can live a much different lifestyle. And then I'm not roped, you know, chained to a desk to make my 6 figures to pay for all of it.
Right.
What if I just didn't need all of this stuff? And so what if I could live on next to nothing? And then I would discover, after the minimalists, I discovered the financial side, like Mr. Money Mustache and some of those more famous bloggers.
Yep.
And then I was like sold. I was like, okay, get my expenses down to the absolute bare minimum that I can get them down to. Not extreme, but you know, I could be if I wanted to be. Yeah. You know, I have a term I like to use, and I'm gonna start an endeavor with it, but it's called frugability.
Frugability, I like it.
Frugability. So watch for that. It's this concept that, you know, I can live really cheaply if I need to. I don't need to all the time. You know, if I'm making money and things are going well, I can, you know, I can have the nice dinner out, and I can go on the vacation and all that stuff. But if everything gets tight, or I want to make a job change and take a 50% pay cut, I could too, because I've given myself that flexibility to live very low cost. I mean, I've looked at tiny houses. I've gone that far. The minimalism concept, you know,
it can get addicting, right?
It really is. I mean, I'm intrigued by these tiny houses. Yeah. I mean, if I didn't have kids, I might be living in a tiny house right now. I don't know. You know, I just like that concept of not having to worry about things and stuff. I mean, just an example, I just rolled in 5 minutes before this podcast started. I got home from work, and to come into a house that's like pretty Spartan, I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to worry about anything. I don't have to, like, a bunch of tasks to take care of. And my house is 1,200 square feet. There's 4 of us here. There's not much extra space. We just use everything to the max. Yeah. We buy just what we need. I just have, you know, I use 2 coffee cups over and over and over again. I've had them. It's like my little trusted friend. You know, I have this mug I've been using for 10 years, and it's great. You know, I just love minimalism.
Has that affected your wardrobe as well?
Oh my gosh, yeah. all of my clothes are on one little rack in my closet. Like everything is in one little tiny. It could fit in one of those little tiny bedroom closets that it needed to. I got a walk-in, but I use half of it for an office. Yeah. In my walk-in little writing desk in there, and the other half is just my clothes. And it makes everything easier. I just can't say enough about minimalism. I'm so thankful. That started me down the path of, maybe I don't need to follow the path. And that was key to me. It wasn't so much the minimalism, but it was like the permission to not live like this consumerist lifestyle that straps you to debt, straps you to a job you don't like to pay for it all. Absolutely. And then the wheel just keeps spinning, and it taught me so many things.
Well, it's an exciting cycle to get into, but you said, you can get into it, man. You can get really into it, and I've gone down that path too. Whether it's minimalism or just financial independence in general, I get all jacked up about these things.
I was going to say, I saw some tweets from you about frugality and Mr. Money Mustache. Did you really go that far?
Well, so what I do is I get really excited about things, and then I don't actually check in with my wife to see if she's interested, and then I just start doing them, and then she's like, whoa.
Wait a second.
I got to say here too, but I mean, it's a good balance between her and I, because I would probably live in a tiny home or a cardboard box or something like that, and it would affect our family life. So she brings me back into reality sometimes, which is good. I'm sure your kids do the same thing. How did your kids adopt the minimalism path with you? Are they fighting it? Are they down with it? How do they feel?
I think they like it. My kids are, and some of it is motivated by the fact I have, my little son has ADHD, and one of the things that I noticed about his attention span is when things get cluttered, he kind of loses it. Like, he just can't hold it together when there's a lot of chaos and noise. And so I keep it very Spartan in some ways for him. It helps him be calm. And I think the kids don't even notice. Like, I don't even use the word minimalism. Yeah. The kids really don't notice. I just keep, they kind of like
what we do.
Right. They will say things like, Dad, you're so OCD, because I'm always like making sure everything's like picked up, like I like my table clear, my counter clear, things like that. And when we leave the house, it's got to be all clear. I don't want to come back to a mess. And so a little bit of is they kind of joke about OCD, but they don't seem to mind too much. And I think maybe some of that is just that they're at the age now where most of their stuff is electronic. Their wants and needs, like an iPad is, right. It's pretty minimalist because it doesn't take up much space and it's hours and hours of entertainment. Exactly. Whereas when they're 4 and they got little toy trucks everywhere and stuff, it's harder. Yeah. To be a minimalist, but they don't really fight it. But it's one of those things. If I made a big deal out of it, they might fight it just because I'm making a big deal out of it, right? It would
be like, to fight Dad on.
Dad, you and this stupid minimalist stuff. Why you keep taking all my stuff? But I just don't say anything. I just keep very little things in the house, and they don't seem to mind. So.
I like it. Well, you're bringing them up in their way of life. I mean, even outside of minimalism, I mean, we were talking about the 9-to-5 way of life. Do you think that you want to encourage your kids to pursue entrepreneurship and like think outside of, working in the cube?
Again, I think it comes down to personality. Yeah. Like we talked about, I really think some people are cut out for the entrepreneur, and some people thrive under the structure of the 9-to-5. I think there's people I've met that would just be a fish out of water if they didn't have their 9-to-5 and their gig and their routine. And as my kids grow, I'm very conscious of their personalities, and I can tell you, I won't say which ones because they might listen to this someday, but I can tell you that there'll be 2 of my kids that are going to thrive outside of the 9-to-5, and will crave a little bit more independence, and then one will be perfectly aligned in a good rigid structure of a job, and so I'll encourage them based on their personality to just find what works for them. Because I think you can go both ways. I mean, forcing somebody into a 9-to-5 that just wasn't meant to be there, it is going to be miserable, and forcing somebody to try and make it on their own who just doesn't have that intuition to go out there and pull together the ideas, or they're pretty introverted and they're the sales and stuff required in an entrepreneur might not be the thing for them. And so again, I think it's just finding what's right for your personality and understanding it. And it goes along with this whole culture thing. I think we get a little off track talking about the whole just be yourself thing, but I think there's some validity to the fact that you got to find what works for you and your personality. And otherwise you're going to live with this constant tension that something's off and you're not in alignment with what you need to be doing. That doesn't mean everything's gonna be great and fun all the time. Sometimes you got to do things you hate. If you're an entrepreneur, you're gonna hate some things, and if you like 9 to 5, you're gonna hate some things.
Absolutely.
So just is what it is.
It's all about balance, and like you said, doing what's right for you. I completely agree with you. So, are you reading any books lately that are exciting you on all these paths we're talking about? I mean, we covered everything today. Anything that's exciting you lately?
I get through a lot of audiobooks on my commute because my commute's an hour each way right now, and I've been cranking out the audiobooks. I've been reading a couple by C.J. DeMarco. One's called The Millionaire Fast Lane, and the other one is called Unscripted. And Unscripted really spoke to me. I'm I call myself a restless cube dweller. I think I'm an entrepreneur at heart, but I've been kind of stuck in the cube. I haven't shared this too much, but I've dug my way out of debt twice. Deep holes. I dug my way out when I was married, and we kind of started our marriage with a bunch of debt and did the whole crazy honeymoon thing and paid for a bunch of daycare when we couldn't afford, and got in a big hole, dug ourselves out. Then I got divorced, which dug a new hole by itself. And then I dug myself out over the next 5 years and got back to level again. And so, I haven't really had a chance to think about doing anything different career-wise than what I've been doing. It just, it's 9 to 5, pays the bills, and good at it, and it's fine. But that's not really been where I want to really sink my teeth into and gets my blood flowing. And so reading Unscripted by C.J. DeMarco has been really eye-opening. It's a good look at entrepreneurship. It's a little bit, every book I take, the perspective of the author into account, right? Like he hit it big on a software idea and made his millions. Well, he's not an expert in everything, right? He did good. He put himself in a position to get rich on an idea, which to be fair, that's what he says in the book is like, I can't tell you how to get rich and, hit it big as an entrepreneur, but I can tell you, you're not going to do it unless you put yourself in the position to do that. Sure. And allow for that to happen. So that's a good one. The Taleb, I always forget, I can't, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, I think is how you say his name, but Skin in the Game was fantastic. I loved that book. It really made me think about, it's part of the reason even I'm here talking to you right now is, putting my face out there a little bit more, putting myself on the line a little bit more. He talks about just, if you're going to do anything meaningful, what's in it? What's the downside for you? And I love that premise. If you're going to make a difference, there has to be a downside for you to do it. And so you have to put yourself out there and take the risk and put yourself out for criticisms and things like that. And so Taleb was good. Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life was a spectacular book as well. I've been a big Jordan Peterson fan for a long time, and when his book came out, that really got me excited. Good book on just sorting yourself out. He says sort yourself out over and over. We say that in our podcast, The Drink. We start our podcast every episode with how sorted we feel on a scale of 0 to 10, and we kind of got that from Jordan Peterson. So
cool.
So those have been good ones. Those are the 4 most recent ones I've done. And then the Napoleon Hill Think and Grow Rich, I think is a staple. I read that a few months back, and I think that no wonder it's survived 70 years and still relevant today. It's just phenomenal.
Unbelievable. Yeah, no, and that's a positive of the long commute. Then I know you don't like the commute, but you get to grab a lot of good knowledge there.
I know, and the likelihood that I would have spent that hour at home reading is pretty slim.
Pretty minimal, right?
Yeah, right. So it's probably good. I probably read more books because of that commute than I ever would have dreamed of doing. Although, I wonder how much the recall is the same when you're driving. You can't take notes. You can't. Kind of thing. But
I mean, I'm able to consume more because of the audiobooks.
Yeah.
But I've found that over the past couple of years where I'm like, hey, I want to read more. But is it the amount of reading that's the positive thing, or is the amount of action you're taking from reading one book or the books? And I don't know what the right answer is. I'm still figuring it out myself.
I'm a terribly slow reader. Like when I read print books, I'm awful. I read. My girlfriend can read a book in 3 hours, and I'm like on page 30. What are you doing? Like, I don't know. I just read really
Drift
slow.
Off. Or I do it at night. I'll fall asleep right away. I'll read one page, and I'm like, boom.
Oh, I can't read at night. I have to read something light at night that I don't care about because I'm just gonna fall asleep anyway. But when I read nonfiction, I tend to really absorb it
Yeah.
and think it through. So I read a page and I kind of think about it, and I really want to get something from it. I don't just want to read it over. And I'm afraid that's what happens a little bit with the audiobooks is you kind of get the main gist, but you don't really get absorbed deeply some of the stuff. And so it's still better than wasting an hour in the car.
That's right.
Pull some things from it. And podcasts are great, right?
Oh yeah, I'm loving podcasts right now. It's been huge for me. The reason I started this one is just because I was listening to them and I'm like, hey, that looks like fun. I think I'd like to do that.
This is fun. I do love this. You can't beat this.
Well, speaking of podcasts, where can people find your show, and then where's the best place for them to follow you?
The best place to find me is on Twitter. I'm mostly just on Twitter right now. Real Mark B33 is my handle there. And the Drink podcast is on, if you look up The Drink, it's on iTunes, Stitcher, all those major players there, or it's thedrink.libsyn.com, libsyn.com is the homepage for the show. We got about 10 episodes out there, and I hope you give it a listen. It's a really fun show.
Well, I've been enjoying it a lot, so keep doing what you're doing,
Good.
man.
Thanks for listening.
Absolutely. I love real conversations. I wanted to have a real one with you today, so thanks for joining, man.
Hey, thanks for having me on.